The morning sun rose over the coastal waters like a golden coin emerging from the depths. Captain Amara Osei stood on the deck of her ship, the Seahawk, watching the horizon with careful eyes. She had been sailing these waters since she was a young girl, learning the trade routes from her father. Now, at 32 years old, she commanded not just one vessel, but an entire fleet of trading ships that her people called the Black Armada. The ships were beautiful, their dark wooden hulls cut through the waves like knives through silk. Each vessel carried goods from the inland kingdoms to distant ports. Cloth, ivory, gold, and spices filled their holds. The trade had made the coastal kingdoms wealthy and proud. For generations, they had sailed freely, making agreements with merchants from many lands. The sea belonged to no one, and everyone who respected it could share in its bounties. Amara's first mate, Kwame, approached her with a worried expression. He was an older man with gray streaks in his hair and scars on his hands from years of working ropes and rigging. He had sailed with Amara's father and had known her since she was a child, running barefoot on the decks. "Captain, the Portuguese ships are still anchored in the bay," Kwame said quietly. "They have not moved since yesterday." Amara nodded. She had been thinking about those 3 ships all night. They were warships, heavy with cannons and carrying soldiers in bright uniforms. Their admiral had come ashore 2 days ago, with demands that still made her blood run hot when she remembered them. The Portuguese wanted control of all trade along the coast. They wanted the coastal kingdoms to pay them tribute, to ask permission before sailing, to sell goods only to Portuguese merchants. They said they were bringing order and civilization. They said it was for everyone's benefit. But Amara knew what those words really meant. They meant submission. They meant the end of freedom. The admiral had stood in the great hall of the Coastal Council, his uniform decorated with gold buttons and medals. He spoke in a voice that expected obedience. He said the Portuguese crown now claimed these waters. He said any ship that did not fly the Portuguese flag and pay Portuguese taxes would be seized. He gave them 1 month to accept these terms. Amara had listened in silence, her jaw tight. Around her, the other captains and merchants shifted uncomfortably. Some looked afraid. Others looked angry. The king of the coastal kingdom, an elderly man named Nkrumah, had asked for time to consider the demands. "We have traded in these waters for longer than your grandfathers have been alive," King Nkrumah had said carefully. "We have agreements with many nations. These are matters that require thought and discussion." The Portuguese admiral had smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You have 1 month," he repeated. "After that, any ship we find will be treated as a pirate vessel. Think carefully about your choice." Now, standing on her deck, Amara thought about that choice. It was no choice at all, really. To accept meant becoming servants in their own waters. It meant watching foreign soldiers tell them where they could sail and who they could trade with. It meant paying for the privilege of doing what they had always done freely, but to refuse meant war. Amara was no fool. She had seen the Portuguese warships. They were bigger than her trading vessels, with more cannons and more men trained for fighting. The Portuguese had conquered other coasts, other kingdoms. Their reputation for brutality was well known. Kwame cleared his throat, bringing Amara back to the present moment. "The council meets this afternoon," he said. "What will you tell them?" Amara looked at her ship, at the crew working quietly on the deck. These men and women depended on her leadership. Their families depended on the wages they earned from trading voyages. Beyond them, entire villages along the coast depended on the prosperity that trade brought. "I will tell them the truth," Amara said finally. "That submission is a slow death. That if we give up our freedom now, we will never get it back." That afternoon, the council gathered in the great hall. 20 captains came, along with merchants, village elders, and representatives from the inland kingdoms. The hall was built of stone and timber, with high windows that let in the sea breeze. Maps covered the walls, showing the trade routes that had enriched them all. King Nkrumah opened the meeting with a prayer to the ancestors and the spirits of the sea. Then he spoke about the Portuguese demands. His voice was heavy with the weight of the decision they faced. "We are traders, not warriors," one merchant said. "Perhaps we can negotiate better terms?" Perhaps we can share the trade routes. Share. Amara stood, her voice clear and strong. They do not want to share. They want to own. Today, they demand taxes. Tomorrow, they will demand our ports. The day after, they will demand our land. I have heard stories from other coasts where the Portuguese have gone. They do not stop with taxes. Another captain, a man named Kofi, who commanded a large cargo vessel, spoke up. But what choice do we have? Their ships have more cannons. Their soldiers have better weapons. If we fight, we will lose everything. If we submit, we lose everything anyway. Amara replied, just more slowly. Our children will grow up as subjects of a foreign king. They will never know the freedom we have known. The debate went on for hours. Some argued for acceptance, believing they could maintain some independence under Portuguese rule. Others argued for resistance, saying freedom was worth any price. The room grew hot, and voices grew loud. Finally, King Necroma raised his hand for silence. Captain Amara, he said, you command our largest fleet. If we choose to resist, you would lead that resistance. Tell me honestly, can we win? Amara thought carefully before answering. She did not want to lie, but she also did not want to give up without trying. I do not know if we can win, she said honestly, but I know we can fight. I know these waters better than any Portuguese admiral. I know how to use our speed against their size. I know where the reefs and currents can trap larger ships. If we prepare properly, if we fight smartly, we have a chance. The king looked around the room at all the faces watching him. Then he looked back at Amara. You believe it is worth the risk? I believe that some things are worth fighting for, Amara said. Our ancestors built this trade over generations. They taught us to sail, to navigate, to honor agreements with our trading partners. If we give that up without even trying to defend it, what will we tell our children? That we were too afraid to protect what was ours. The vote took place as the sun began to set. It was not unanimous, but the majority chose resistance. They would refuse the Portuguese demands. They would prepare to defend their waters. That night, Amara stood on the deck of her ship again, looking at the lights of the Portuguese warships in the distance. She had gotten what she argued for, but now the weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders. People would die because of this decision. Ships would burn. Families would grieve. Kwame joined her at the rail. Having doubts, Captain? Many doubts, Amara admitted, but no regrets. Not yet. The Portuguese will come with more ships, Kwame said. Then we will need to be ready, Amara replied. She turned to face her first mate. Send word to all our allied captains. We have 1 month before the Portuguese deadline. We use that time to prepare. We gather every ship we can. We study their movements. We plan for every possibility. Kwame nodded and went to carry out her orders. Amara remained at the rail, watching the enemy ships and thinking about the storm that was coming. The Black Armada had answered the Portuguese demands with defiance. Now they would see if that defiance could be backed with action. The sea was calm that night. But Amara knew it would not stay calm for long. The month of preparation passed too quickly. Amara worked from dawn until long after dark, organizing defenses and training crews. The trading ships of the Black Armada were not built for war, but they could be adapted. Crews practiced maneuvers, learning to sail in tight formations. Carpenters reinforced holes and built protective barriers on decks. Blacksmiths worked day and night forging weapons and repairing old cannons that had not been fired in years. On the morning, the Portuguese deadline expired. 3 warships appeared at the entrance to the main harbor. They moved slowly, deliberately, like predators that knew their prey had nowhere to run. Their guns were run out, black mouths pointing toward the town. A white flag went up the mast of the lead ship. A small boat was lowered to bring a messenger ashore. Amara met the messenger on the dock with King Nkrumah and several other captains. The Portuguese officer was young, barely 20. With nervous eyes that darted around at the armed men lining the waterfront, Admiral Ferreira demands your answer, the officer said in halting words, speaking the coastal language poorly. Will you accept the terms of Portugal, or will you face the consequences? King Necroma stepped forward. His back was straight, his voice steady. Tell your admiral that these waters have been free since before his king was born. Tell him we reject his demands. Tell him to take his ships and leave in peace, or stay and face warriors who will not bow. The young officer's face went pale. He stammered something, then turned and hurried back to his boat. Amara watched him row away, her heart pounding. There would be no turning back now. The Portuguese ships did not leave. They stayed at the harbor entrance, blocking all passage in or out. It was a siege without soldiers on land. Any ship trying to leave would have to pass directly under their guns. The message was clear: submit or starve. But Amara had expected this. She had prepared for it. That night, when the moon was dark and clouds covered the stars, 5 small fishing boats slipped out of the harbor through channels too shallow for the Portuguese warships. Each boat carried messages to other coastal towns, calling for support and coordinating a response. 3 nights later, the Black Armada struck. 15 ships left harbors up and down the coast simultaneously. They were smaller than the Portuguese warships, faster and more agile. They knew every reef, every current, every hidden channel in these waters. The Portuguese did not. Amara commanded the attack herself, standing on the deck of the Seahawk as they approached the blockading ships in the early morning darkness. She could see the outlines of the 3 Portuguese vessels, their lanterns burning like small stars on the water. They were anchored in deep water, confident in their superior firepower. "Ready the fire arrows?" Amara whispered to her crew. "Wait for my signal." The Black Armada ships split into 3 groups, each targeting 1 Portuguese vessel. They came from different directions, making it hard for the enemy to coordinate their response. When they were close enough to see the faces of the Portuguese sailors on watch, Amara gave the signal. Fire arrows arced through the darkness, trailing sparks like falling stars. They struck sails and rigging, and flames began to spread. Shouts of alarm rang out from the Portuguese ships. Men rushed to fight the fires while others ran to the guns, but the Black Armada did not wait to trade cannon fire. That was a battle they would lose. Instead, Amara's ships used the confusion to slip past the blockade into deeper waters. The Portuguese ships tried to pursue, but one had run aground on a reef in the chaos. The other 2 gave chase, their superior size and firepower making them confident. Amara led them on a winding path through waters. She had sailed since childhood. She knew where the sandbars lurked just below the surface. She knew where the rocks jutted up like teeth waiting to tear open hulls. Behind her, the Portuguese ships followed, their captains too angry to be cautious. The trap worked perfectly. Both pursuing ships ran aground within minutes of each other, their hulls scraping and grinding on hidden obstacles. The Portuguese sailors tried desperately to free their vessels, but the tide was going out. They would be stuck until it returned. The Black Armada circled back. Now the Portuguese were helpless, their ships immobile and listing to one side. Amara could have destroyed them completely. Part of her wanted to make the Portuguese pay for their arrogance. But destroying the ships would mean killing hundreds of men, many of whom were just following orders. Instead, she gave different orders. Fire at their masts and rigging. Disable them, but do not aim at the crews. The cannons spoke, their thunder rolling across the water. Wood splintered and ropes parted. Masts came crashing down in tangles of canvas and line. When it was done, the Portuguese ships were crippled, but their crews were mostly unharmed. As the sun rose, painting the water gold and pink, Amara surveyed the damage. The blockade was broken. The Black Armada had proven they could fight back. But she also saw the cost. 2 of her own ships had been hit by Portuguese cannon fire before the enemy vessels grounded. One was sinking slowly, its crew already transferred to other vessels. The other was badly damaged. It's taken on water faster than it could be pumped out. 17 sailors from the Black Armada died that morning. 17 people who had families waiting for them, who had laughed and worked and dreamed of peaceful futures. Their bodies were wrapped in sailcloth and given to the sea with prayers and tears. The victory felt hollow as Amara watched those burials. This was only the first battle, and already the price was high. How many more would die before it was over? Word of the battle spread quickly along the coast. Some captains who had been undecided now joined the Black Armada, inspired by the victory. Ships and crews arrived daily, swelling their numbers. But not everyone saw it as good news. Some merchants, who had chosen to submit to the Portuguese, now found themselves in a difficult position. Caught between two sides, the council met again a week after the battle. This time the mood was different. They had drawn blood, and blood brought consequences. King Nkrumah looked older, more tired. The weight of leadership in wartime showed in the lines on his face. "The Portuguese will send more ships," he said. "This victory will make them angry. They will come with greater force. Then we will be ready for them," Amara said. But even as she spoke, doubt gnawed at her. Could they really stand against the full might of the Portuguese navy? It was during this meeting that the betrayal was discovered. A merchant named Ajay, who had been part of the council from the beginning, stood to speak. He suggested negotiating with the Portuguese, offering some compromise to avoid further bloodshed. His argument seemed reasonable, but something in his tone made Amara suspicious. That night, she had Ajay followed. Her suspicions proved correct. Ajay met with a Portuguese agent in a warehouse by the docks. He gave the man documents showing ship positions, supply locations, and defensive plans. In exchange, he received a heavy purse of gold coins. Amara felt sick watching this exchange. Ajay was not just a merchant she disagreed with. He was someone she had known for years, someone whose children played with other council members' children. Now he was selling information that would get people killed. The arrest happened at dawn. Amara's men surrounded Ajay's house before he woke. They found more evidence inside. Letters from Portuguese officials, promises of wealth and position if he helped them. Maps marked with targets for attack. Ajay was brought before the council in chains. He did not try to deny what he had done. Instead, he tried to justify it. "You are leading us to destruction," he shouted at Amara. "The Portuguese cannot be defeated. I was trying to save lives by ending this foolish resistance." "You were trying to save yourself," Amara replied coldly. "And you were willing to sacrifice everyone else to do it." The trial was brief. The evidence was overwhelming. The council voted unanimously for the harshest punishment. Ajay was exiled, sent away with nothing but the clothes on his back. Some wanted him executed, but Amara argued against it. "If we become killers of our own people, we lose what we are fighting for," she said. "Let him live with his shame." But the betrayal shook everyone. If Ajay had turned traitor, who else might do the same? Trust became a precious commodity. Amara found herself questioning everyone, wondering who else might be working for the Portuguese. Kwame found her late one night, sitting alone on the deck of her ship. "You cannot carry all of this by yourself, Captain," he said gently. "I am responsible for every life lost," Amara said. "Those 17 sailors died following my orders. How many more will die before this is done?" "Those 17 sailors died fighting for something they believed in?" Kwame corrected her. "You did not force them. They chose this, just as you did." "Just as I did." Amara looked at her old friend. "Do you think we can win?" Kwame was quiet for a long moment. "I think we can fight. Whether we can win depends on how much we are willing to sacrifice and how long we can hold on. The Portuguese have more ships, more guns, more men. But we have something they do not." "What is that?" "We are fighting for our home," Kwame said simply. "They are just following orders from a king who lives across an ocean." "That matters." As if to prove his point, news arrived the next morning that changed everything. Portuguese ships had raided a coastal village 30 miles to the south. They had burned houses, seized goods, and taken prisoners. The message was clear. If the Black Armada wanted war, Portugal would bring war to everyone. The smoke could be seen from miles away, a dark column rising into the clear morning sky. Amara stood at the rail of the Seahawk, watching that smoke with a heavy heart. She knew what it meant. Another village burning? More innocent people paying the price for the Black Armada's resistance. When they reached the village, the destruction was complete. Houses were reduced to smoking ruins. Fishing boats lay shattered on the beach. The Portuguese had taken everything of value and burned the rest. Worst of all, they had taken people. 23 villagers, including women and children, had been loaded onto Portuguese ships and carried away. An old woman sat in the ruins of what had been her home, rocking back and forth and singing a morning song. Her granddaughter had been taken. Amara knelt beside her, but no words came. What could she say? That this was necessary? That freedom had a price? The words felt empty in the face of such grief. They said we were being punished for helping you, the old woman said, her eyes distant. They said every village that supports the Black Armada will suffer the same fate. Amara felt those words like a knife in her chest. This was exactly what the Portuguese wanted. They were trying to turn the coastal people against the resistance by making them suffer. It was a strategy as old as war itself, and it was working. As the Black Armada ships helped the villagers begin rebuilding, Amara called her captains together. They met on the beach, away from the survivors. The mood was grim. "We cannot protect every village," Captain Kofi said bluntly. "The Portuguese can strike anywhere along the coast. We cannot be everywhere at once." "Then we need to make them afraid to strike," Amara replied. "We need to hit them harder than they hit us." "How?" another captain asked. "They have 8 warships now. More arrive every week. We lost ships in the last battle, and they have been replaced with bigger ones." It was true. After the first confrontation, the Portuguese had sent for reinforcements. Their fleet now included 8 major warships, each one bigger and more heavily armed than anything the Black Armada could field. Direct confrontation would be suicide. Amara looked out at the water, thinking, the Portuguese expected them to fight like a navy, ship against ship, cannon against cannon. But the Black Armada was not a navy. They were traders and fishermen who had learned to fight. They needed to fight in ways the Portuguese could not predict or counter. "We stop attacking their ships," Amara said slowly, an idea forming. "We attack their supplies." Kwame understood immediately. Their food, their water, their ammunition. Everything they need comes from somewhere else. They have to bring it here on supply ships. "Exactly," Amara said, warming to the strategy. "We let their warships sit in harbor. We ignore them. But every supply ship, every transport, every vessel that brings them what they need, we hunt those down. We sink them or capture them. We starve them out." The plan was risky, but possible. Portuguese supply ships were less well-armed than warships. They relied on escorts for protection, but escorts could be avoided or outrun. The Black Armada's smaller. Faster ships were perfect for this kind of warfare. Over the next 2 weeks, the Black Armada transformed into something new. They were no longer trying to hold territory or win battles. They became hunters, striking quickly and disappearing before the Portuguese could respond. A supply ship carrying food was captured in the night. A transport bringing fresh soldiers was driven onto rocks by clever maneuvering. A watership was seized, and its precious cargo distributed to coastal villages. The strategy worked. The Portuguese warships had plenty of firepower, but nothing to eat. Their crews grew hungry and irritable. Disease began to spread on ships that could not get fresh water. The Portuguese commanders had to divert their warships to escort duty, leaving them unable to launch raids on villages. But the Portuguese adapted too. They began sending larger convoys with more escorts. They varied their routes and timing. They set traps, using fake supply ships as bait to lure Black Armada vessels into ambushes. Amara lost 3 more ships to these traps. The casualties mounted. Every week brought news of more dead, more wounded, more ships damaged beyond repair. The Black Armada was bleeding, and everyone knew it. It was during this time that Amara's sister Ama came to see her. Ama lived in one of the coastal villages with her husband and 2 young children. She came aboard the Seahawk one evening, her face tight with anger and fear. "How many more have to die, Amara?" Ama demanded without preamble. "How many more villages have to burn? When is enough enough?" Amara had been expecting this conversation, but that did not make it easier. "We are fighting for our freedom," she said. "For the freedom of your children And their children? My children will not have a future if they are dead, Amma shot back. The Portuguese raided a village just 5 miles from mine yesterday. They are getting closer. My neighbors are terrified. They asked me to beg you to stop this war. If we stop, we lose everything. We are losing everything anyway. Amma's voice broke. Can you not see that? The Portuguese are destroying us piece by piece. Maybe submission would be better than this destruction. Those words hung in the air between them. Amara wanted to argue to explain why giving up would be worse in the long run. But looking at her sister's frightened face, she wondered if she was right. Was she being brave or just stubborn? Was she fighting for freedom or just for pride? I do not know if I am doing the right thing, Amara admitted quietly. But I know that if we stop now, all of this suffering will have been for nothing. Every person who died will have died for no reason. And if you continue, more people will die for no reason, Amma said. You cannot win this war, Amara. Everyone knows it. The Portuguese are too strong, too many. All you can do is prolong the suffering. After Amma left, Amara stood alone on the deck long into the night. Doubt gnawed at her like a hungry rat. Maybe her sister was right. Maybe she was leading her people to destruction out of pride. Maybe the wise thing would be to negotiate, to seek terms that would at least end the violence. Kwame found her there as the stars began to fade toward dawn. He did not say anything at first, just stood beside her looking at the water. Your sister spoke truth, Amara said finally. We cannot win. Not in the way wars are normally won, perhaps Kwame agreed. But we can make winning too expensive for them. We can make them regret ever coming here. We can make the cost so high that other kingdoms will think twice before challenging us. At what cost to our own people? That is the question every leader must answer, Kwame said. I cannot answer it for you. The next morning brought news that hardened Amara's resolve. A Portuguese raiding party had attacked a village during the night. But this time, the villagers had fought back with weapons provided by the Black Armada. They had killed 12 Portuguese soldiers and driven the rest away. The cost had been high, 8 villagers dead. Many more wounded, but they had proven something important. They could fight back. They were not helpless victims. More importantly, the Portuguese commander had responded with fury. He sent a message to King Nkrumah, demanding that the villagers who had fought back be turned over for punishment. He threatened to burn 10 villages if his demands were not met. King Nkrumah called an emergency council meeting. The Portuguese message was read aloud, and the room erupted in angry shouting. Turn over their own people for defending themselves. Never. But if they refused, 10 villages would burn. Amara stood and waited for silence. When the room quieted, she spoke clearly. The Portuguese commander has made a mistake. He has shown us that he fears us. He would not threaten 10 villages if one village fighting back did not worry him. He is trying to frighten us into submission because he cannot defeat us. But what about the 10 villages? Someone asked. Will you sacrifice them for this war? I will not sacrifice them, Amara said. I will defend them. The Portuguese think they can terrorize us into giving up. I say we show them that terror works both ways. That night, Amara launched the most daring attack of the war. While the Portuguese fleet sat in harbor, confident in their strength, the Black Armada struck at their land base. A team of raiders crept into the Portuguese encampment where supplies were stored. They moved silently through the darkness, avoiding sentries, till they reached the supply warehouses. The fires started small, but they grew quickly. Gunpowder exploded with thunderous roars that woke the entire camp. Ammunition cooked off, sending projectiles flying in all directions. Food stores went up in flames. Barrels of tar and pitch added to the inferno. By the time the Portuguese organized a response, the damage was done. Months of carefully stockpiled supplies were destroyed in a single night. The Black Armada raiders melted away into the darkness, leaving chaos behind them. But the Portuguese exacted revenge. They burned villages in retaliation. Amara stood on the beach of one of those villages, watching the last embers of houses cool to gray ash. An old man approached her, his face covered in soot. Was it worth it, Captain? He asked. His voice was not angry, just tired. All this burning and killing, was it worth it? Amara looked at the destruction around her. She thought about her sister's words, about the mounting casualties, about the endless cycle of attack and counterattack. She thought about the choice that had brought them here, submission or resistance. "I do not know," she said honestly. "But I know that if we had submitted without fighting, we would have lost something we can never get back. Our dignity. Our right to choose our own fate. Maybe that is not worth this destruction. Or maybe it is the only thing worth fighting for. I suppose history will decide." The old man nodded slowly and walked away. Amara stood there until the sun rose, wondering if she was a freedom fighter or just someone too proud to admit defeat. The dawn came red as blood, painting the water and sky in shades of crimson. Sailors said that a red dawn meant violence coming, and on this morning, they would be proved right. Amara stood on the deck of the Seahawk, looking out at the assembled fleet of the Black Armada. 15 ships of varying sizes bobbed on the gentle swells, their crews ready for the battle that everyone knew was coming. The Portuguese had finally had enough of the Black Armada's raids and ambushes. They were bringing their full fleet to crush the resistance once and for all. 12 warships, the largest gathering of Portuguese naval power ever seen in these waters, were sailing toward them right now. Scouts had spotted them at dawn, their white sails visible on the horizon like the wings of angels of death. Amara had gathered every ship, every capable sailor, every weapon they could find. This would be the decisive battle. If they lost, the Black Armada would cease to exist. If they won, they might just buy enough time to survive. She tried not to think about the odds. 12 Portuguese warships against 15 ships of mixed quality. Many of her vessels were converted trading ships with crews who had only learned to fight in the last few months. Kwame appeared at her elbow. "The captains are waiting for your final orders," he said quietly. Amara nodded. She had spent the last 3 days planning for this battle. She knew she could not fight the Portuguese in a straight engagement, ship against ship, cannon against cannon. The Portuguese had more firepower, better training, stronger hulls. In a traditional naval battle, the Black Armada would be destroyed in an hour, so she would not fight a traditional battle. "Signal the captains," Amara said. "We execute the plan exactly as discussed. No one breaks formation until I give the signal. Speed and coordination are everything today." The signal flags went up. Across the water, 15 captains acknowledged the orders. The Black Armada began to move, sailing in a pattern that would have looked strange to any naval commander. Instead of forming a battle line, they spread out in 3 groups, each taking a different position. It looked like they were running away, splitting up to escape. That was exactly what Amara wanted the Portuguese to think. The Portuguese fleet appeared an hour later, ships magnificent and terrible. The flagship led the way, a 3-masted warship with 40 guns. Behind it came 11 more vessels, all heavily armed and built for war. Their flags snapped in the morning breeze, bright colors that marked them as warriors of a distant king. On the Portuguese flagship, Admiral Ferreira studied the scattered ships of the Black Armada through his spyglass. He smiled. They were running, just as he expected. Savages with trading ships playing at being warriors. Today would teach them the price of defying Portugal. "All ships give chase," he ordered. "The faster vessels pursue the smaller groups. The heavier ships follow me. We will crush them piece by piece." The Portuguese fleet split up, exactly as Amara had hoped. 4 ships broke off to chase one group of Black Armada vessels. 3 more went after another group. That left 5 ships, including the flagship, to pursue what appeared to be the main force, but appearances were deceiving. The Black Armada ships led their pursuers on a winding chase through the coastal waters. They sailed fast, staying just out of cannon range, drawing the Portuguese deeper into waters they did not know well. The Portuguese captains, confident in their superior ships, followed eagerly. Amara watched from her position, timing everything carefully. The wind was right. The tide was right. The Portuguese ships were exactly where she needed them to be. "Now," she said quietly. Kwame raised the signal flag that everyone had been waiting for. All across the water, The Black Armada ships stopped running. They turned sharply, using their superior knowledge of the winds and currents. The groups that had seemed to be fleeing now converged from 3 different directions, strapping the Portuguese ships that had chased them in a closing triangle. Admiral Ferreira realized his mistake too late. His fleet was divided, spread out across miles of ocean. The ships closest to shore had sailed into shallow water, pursuing what they thought were fleeing vessels. Now they found themselves surrounded by enemies, who knew these waters like their own homes. The Battle of Crimson Waters began in earnest. Amara's ship, the Seahawk, led one group in a bold charge directly at the Portuguese flagship. It was a risky move, taking a smaller vessel against a ship with 3 times as many guns. But Amara was not planning to exchange broadsides. She planned something else entirely. The Portuguese guns spoke first, their cannons roaring like thunder. Iron balls screamed through the air, some missing, some striking home. The Seahawk shuddered as one ball smashed through the railing, sending splinters flying. A sailor next to Amara went down screaming, his leg torn open. But Amara did not slow down. She steered straight at the flagship, closer and closer, too close for the Portuguese to lower their guns enough to hit her. At the last moment, she turned hard, bringing the Seahawk alongside the enemy ship. Her crew threw grappling hooks, pulling the 2 vessels together. "Boarders away," Amara shouted, drawing her sword. What followed was chaos. Black Armada sailors poured onto the Portuguese deck, and hand-to-hand fighting erupted across the ship. Swords clashed, pistols fired, men shouted and screamed. Amara fought her way forward, her blades singing as she parried and struck. A Portuguese officer lunged at her and she sidestepped, letting his momentum carry him past before striking him down. On other parts of the battlefield, similar fights erupted. Black Armada ships used their speed and maneuverability to close with the larger Portuguese vessels, boarding them before the superior firepower could be brought to bear. It was brutal, desperate fighting, the kind where training mattered less than determination. 3 Portuguese ships ran aground on the reefs and sandbars that the Black Armada had led them toward. Their crews struggled to free the ships even as Black Armada vessels circled like sharks, firing into the stranded ships. But the Portuguese were not helpless. They were professional sailors and soldiers, trained for exactly this kind of combat. On several ships, they drove back the boarding parties with heavy casualties. Their cannons continued to fire, and when they found targets, the results were devastating. One Black Armada ship took a full broadside at close range and simply fell apart, spilling men into the water. Amara fought her way to the Portuguese flagship's quarterdeck. Admiral Ferreira stood there with a drawn sword, directing his men. He saw Amara coming, and his eyes widened in recognition. He said in Portuguese, "The woman captain. You have caused me much trouble. Should have left when you had the chance." Amara replied in the same language. Learned from her trading days. They fought, and it was nothing like the duels and stories. It was fast, brutal, and desperate. Ferreira was skilled, trained by the best swordmasters in Portugal. But Amara had spent her life fighting the sea, fighting storms, fighting for survival. She was strong and quick, and absolutely determined to win. The fight ended when Kwame appeared behind the admiral and struck him with a belaying pin. Ferreira went down hard, his sword clattering across the deck. Around them, the Portuguese crew saw their commander fall and began to lose heart. "Your admiral has fallen," Amara shouted in Portuguese. "Surrender your ship or die with it." The Portuguese hesitated. Some wanted to keep fighting. Others looked at the chaos around them, the Black Armada sailors who seemed to be everywhere, and began to lower their weapons. Slowly, section by section, the flagship surrendered. But the battle was not over. Across the water, fighting continued. Ships burned. Men died. The water between the vessels turned red with blood, giving the battle the name it would be remembered by. Then, just when it seemed the Black Armada might achieve an impossible victory, reinforcements arrived. Sails appeared on the horizon, but they were not Portuguese. They flew the flags of neighboring kingdoms who had been watching the conflict, waiting to see who would win. Inspired by the Black Armada's fierce resistance, 3 kingdoms had sent their own ships to join the fight. 8 more vessels joined the battle. Fresh crews and undamaged ships, the balance tipped decisively. The Portuguese fleet, already battered and with several ships captured or grounded, found themselves suddenly outnumbered. The Portuguese captains were experienced enough to know when a battle was lost. Signal flags went up across their remaining ships. Withdraw. Those vessels, still capable of maneuvering, began to pull back, leaving their grounded and captured ships behind. They retreated in relatively good order. They retreated nonetheless. As the last Portuguese ship disappeared over the horizon, a ragged cheer went up from the Black Armada crews. They had won. Against all odds, against superior force and firepower, they had won. But Amara could not cheer. She stood on the captured flagship's deck, looking at the carnage around her. Bodies floated in the red-stained water. Ships burned, sending up columns of black smoke. From all across the battlefield came the screams of the wounded. The Seahawk was heavily damaged. 2 of its masts broken and its hull holed in several places. 3 Black Armada ships had been sunk completely, their crews lost. 5 more were so badly damaged they would never sail again. The human cost was even worse. As the count came in through the day, the numbers made Amara feel sick. Over 300 dead, nearly 500 wounded. Kwame found her as the sun began to set, still standing on the captured flagship's deck. "We won, Captain," he said quietly. "Did we?" Amara looked at the destruction surrounding them. "Look at the price we paid. Look at how many will never go home to their families." "They fought for something they believed in," Kwame said. "They died free men and women, not slaves or subjects. That counts for something." Amara knew he was right, but it did not make the weight any lighter. She had led these people into battle. She had given the orders that sent them to their deaths. That responsibility would be with her forever. That night, Black Armada and their allies began the sad task of caring for the wounded and honoring the dead. Bodies were sewn into sailcloth and given to the sea with prayers. The wounded were taken to shore, where healers waited. The damaged ships were towed to harbor for repairs. Amara stood on the beach as the last of the burials took place. Families stood nearby, crying for sons and daughters, husbands and wives who would not return. An old woman approached her, the same woman she had seen in the burned village weeks ago. "My grandson fought on your ship," the woman said. "He did not survive the battle." Amara prepared herself for anger, for blame. She deserved it. But the woman surprised her. "He was proud to fight," the old woman continued. "He told me that if he died, it would be for something that mattered. Thank you for giving him that chance." The woman turned and walked away, leaving Amara standing alone with tears running down her face. She had thought winning the battle would bring relief, even joy. Instead, she just felt tired and sad and old beyond her years. 3 weeks after the battle, a Portuguese ship appeared on the horizon. It flew a white flag of truce and sailed slowly, making no threatening moves. Amara watched it approach with mixed feelings. She knew what this meant. The Portuguese were coming to negotiate. The meeting took place in King Nkrumah's great hall. A Portuguese delegation, led by a diplomat rather than an admiral, presented their terms. Portugal was withdrawing its claim to exclusive control of the coastal trade routes. They acknowledged the sovereignty of the coastal kingdoms over their own waters. There would be no tribute, no taxes, no submission required. It was everything the Black Armada had fought for. It was victory. But as Amara listened to the diplomat speak, she felt no joy. Victory tasted like ashes in her mouth. The Portuguese were leaving because the cost of staying had become too high. They had lost ships, men, and prestige. Other kingdoms along the coast were now inspired to resist. Portugal had decided these waters were not worth the price. The Black Armada had won. But the victory felt hollow. After the Portuguese delegation left, the council celebrated. There was food and drink, music and dancing. People laughed and sang, relieved that the war was finally over. But Amara slipped away from the celebration. Walking down to the harbor alone, the Seahawk sat at anchor, undergoing repairs. Carpenters worked on the damaged masts. Sailmakers stitched new canvas. The ship would sail again, but it would never be quite the same. The scars of battle would always be visible. It's like the scars everyone who survived this war would carry. Kwame found her there, as he always seemed to when she needed someone to talk to. He sat beside her on the dock, saying nothing at first, just keeping her company. "Why do I not feel like we won?" Amara asked finally. "'Cause you were counting the cost," Kwame said simply. "Because you are thinking about the 300 who died, the 500 who were wounded, the ships that were lost, the villages that burned." "So many sacrifices," Amara whispered. "And for what? So we can trade freely. Is that worth all those lives?" "That is not the question you should ask," Kwame said. "The question is, what would have happened if we had submitted? Would those lives have been saved? Or would they have been lost in different ways, more slowly, less dramatically?" Amara thought about that. She thought about what submission would have meant. Portuguese governors making decisions about who could sail and where. Portuguese soldiers in their ports taking what they wanted. Portuguese rules slowly eroding their way of life, their culture, their identity. Freedom lost not in one battle, but in 1,000 small defeats over years and generations. "I suppose we will never know," she said. Kwame agreed. "We only know what we chose, and we chose to fight for what was ours." The days that followed were busy with practical matters. The Black Armada had to be rebuilt. Ships needed repairs or replacement. Wounded sailors needed care. Families who had lost providers needed support. The coastal kingdom's economy had been disrupted by months of warfare, and trade routes had to be reestablished. Amara threw herself into this work. It was easier to focus on practical problems than to think about the larger questions that haunted her. She organized the rebuilding of damaged vessels. She negotiated new trade agreements with kingdoms that had sent ships to help in the final battle. She visited wounded sailors and tried to offer comfort to families who had lost loved ones. It was during one of these visits that she met a young boy, maybe 10 years old, whose father had died in the Battle of Crimson Waters. The boy's name was Kofi, like the captain who had questioned the wisdom of resistance in those early days. "My mother says my father was a hero," young Kofi said, his voice uncertain. "But I just want him back." Was it worth it? Was fighting worth my father dying? Amara knelt down to look the boy in the eyes. She could have given him easy answers, comfortable lies. She could have told him that his father's death had great meaning, that it was necessary and noble. But she owed him more than that. "I do not know," she said honestly. "Your father fought because he believed his children should grow up free. He believed that was worth the risk. But you are the one who has to live without him, so only you can decide if it was worth it. Right now, I imagine you think nothing could be worth losing your father." The boy nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Someday," Amara continued, "you will be a man. You will sail these waters freely, making your own choices about where to go and what to trade. You will answer to no foreign king, pay no unjust taxes, bow to no colonial governor. And maybe then you will understand what your father died for. Or maybe you will still think it was not worth it. Either way, your feelings are valid." The boy threw his arms around her and sobbed. Amara held him, thinking about all the other children who had lost parents. All the parents who had lost children. All the broken families and shattered lives. This was the real cost of freedom. This was what the celebrations and treaties could not erase. Months passed. The coastal kingdoms slowly healed. Trade resumed, and prosperity began to return. Ships sailed freely, their captains answering to no one but their own kings and councils. The Portuguese maintained a few trading posts by mutual agreement, but they never again tried to claim dominion over the waters. Other kingdoms along the coast heard about the Black Armada's victory. Some sent emissaries, asking for advice on resisting colonial pressure. Others formed their own defensive alliances, inspired by what the coastal kingdoms had accomplished. The resistance spread, like ripples from a stone thrown in still water. But for every success story, there were reminders of the cost. Amara visited the burned villages that were being rebuilt. She saw the empty spaces where houses once stood, the missing faces at community gatherings. She attended ceremonies honoring the dead, standing with families who would never fully recover from their losses. 2 years after the Battle of Crimson Waters, Amara's sister Ama came to visit again. This time her face was peaceful rather than angry. They walked along the beach together, watching the waves. "I was wrong," Ama said suddenly. "When I told you to stop fighting, I was wrong." "You were trying to protect your family," Amara replied. "That was not wrong. But I did not understand what we would have lost," Ama continued. "My children are growing up in a different world than the one we would have had under Portuguese rule. They can dream bigger dreams. They can choose their own paths. That is because of what you did. What all of you did. Cost so much," Amara said. Ma agreed. "But some things are worth the cost." I did not believe that then. I do now. As Amara grew older, she spent less time at sea and more time on land. She trained younger captains, passing on the skills and knowledge she had gained. She told them about the war, not glorifying it, but not hiding from its truth either. She wanted them to understand that freedom was precious but not free, that victory was possible but never easy, that the choices leaders made had consequences that echoed through generations. On her 60th birthday, the coastal kingdoms held a ceremony in her honor. Ships from all along the coast gathered in the harbor, their flags flying. Sailors young and old came to pay their respects to the woman who had led the Black Armada, King Nkrumah, spoke about Amaris, spoke about Amara's courage and leadership. Other speakers praised her tactical brilliance and determination. But when it came time for Amara to speak, she surprised everyone by talking not about victory, but about cost. "We fought a war, and we won," she said, her voice still strong despite her age. "But we should never forget the price we paid. 317 people died in that war. I remember their names. I remember their faces. 543 were wounded, some carrying injuries that will pain them for the rest of their lives. 17 villages were burned. Countless families were torn apart." The crowd grew quiet, listening. "We won our freedom," Amara continued, "and that matters. It matters that you can sail these waters without asking permission from a foreign king. It matters that you answer to your own councils and kings, not to colonial governors. It matters that your children grow up free. But we must never forget that freedom was bought with blood and tears and sacrifice." She paused, looking out at all the faces watching her. "When I was young, I thought winning was everything. Now I am old, and I understand that how we win matters as much as whether we win. We could have won this war by becoming as brutal and ruthless as our enemies. We could have attacked Portuguese civilians, burned their ships with all hands aboard, shown no mercy to prisoners. But we chose a different path. We fought for freedom while trying to preserve our humanity. That is harder than just fighting to win. So when you remember the Black Armada," Amara concluded, "remember not just that we won. Remember that we tried to win honorably. Remember that we fought for something that mattered. And remember that freedom is not a gift. It is a responsibility. Every generation must choose to protect it or lose it." Years later, when Amara was an old woman, too old to sail anymore, she would sit on the beach and watch the ships come and go. Young Kofi, the boy whose father had died in the battle, had grown into a fine captain himself. He would visit her sometimes, bringing news from distant ports. "Do you regret it?" he asked her one day. "Looking back, do you regret leading the Black Armada into war?" Amara was quiet for a long time, thinking. She thought about all the people who had died. She thought about the villages that burned. She thought about the families torn apart and the lives shattered. But she also thought about the freedom they had won, the independence they had preserved, the example they had set for other kingdoms. "I regret the cost," she said finally. "I will always regret the cost. But I do not regret the choice. We were given an impossible situation: submission or resistance, slavery or war. There were no good options, only terrible ones. We chose the terrible option that at least gave us a chance to remain free. My father would be proud of what we built," Kofi said, looking out at the busy harbor. "Ships from everywhere trading freely. No foreign governors telling us what to do. Children growing up free." "Your father was proud before he died," Amara told him. "He died knowing what he was fighting for. That counts for something." When Amara finally passed away, at the age of 73, the entire coast mourned. Ships from every kingdom flew their flags at half-mast. Sailors young and old came to pay their respects. She was buried at sea, her body sewn into sailcloth and given to the waves she had loved all her life. The Black Armada lived on after her. New captains took command of the ships. New sailors learned the routes and skills. The name became a symbol, a reminder of what was possible when people stood together against impossible odds. But the legacy was complicated, as all legacies are. The victory had preserved freedom, but at a terrible cost. The war had united the coastal kingdoms, but the scars remained. Future generations enjoyed the liberty their ancestors had fought for, but they also inherited the responsibility to protect it. And on quiet evenings, when the wind was right and the sea was calm, old sailors would tell stories about Captain Amara Asay and the Black Armada. They would talk about the Battle of Crimson Waters, about the courage and the sacrifice, but they would also talk about the cost, about the villages that burned and the families that never recovered, because that was Amara's final gift to her people. Not just freedom, but wisdom. The wisdom to understand that freedom is worth fighting for, but never to forget what fighting costs. The wisdom to celebrate victory while honoring sacrifice. The wisdom to know that the hardest battles are not won with swords and cannons, but with the courage to make impossible choices and live with the consequences. The Black Armada had answered the demand for submission with fire. And in that fire, it forged something that would last far longer than any empire. The knowledge that people who stand together, who fight for what matters, who refuse to accept injustice, can change their fate. Even when the odds seem impossible. Even when the cost is terrible. Even when victory means carrying the weight of what was lost. That was the true legacy of the Black Armada. Not the battles they won, but the choice they made to fight it all.